Smoking was not only accepted, but it was regarded as something that was sort of cool or macho. The ads for smoking they were universal. You'd see them in magazines, newspapers, on the radio, television.
More doctors smoke Camel than any other cigarette.
Children to young people.
Let's take a Winston break. That's it, Winston.
A coalition of health groups called on the federal government today to outlaw an ad campaign for Camel cigarettes featuring a cartoon camel. The health groups say the cartoon character is popular even with preschoolers and is a part of a campaign to boost cigarette sales to the young.
Big Tobacco targeted youth, and they did this very explicitly, it turns out, because they knew that tobacco products were addictive.
Smoking is addictive as any drug. That word comes from Surgeon General C. Everett Koop, who put his latest stamp of disapproval on the cigarette habit today.
If I had my way, I would say it is just as addictive as heroin or cocaine.
There are definitions of addiction, such as the 1978 Surgeon General's definition, and indeed I think the Man in the Street's definition, which would say yes, smoking is addictive.
And so if you could get young people starting to smoke, then you would have a customer for life.
This document presents the strongest case yet against cigarette smoking. Among the findings were that cigarette smoking is the major cause of lung cancer, is related to other cancers, heart disease, birth defects, and even peptic ulcers.
There were cases that were brought to the courts trying to hold big tobacco companies liable for the death of people who have died of lung cancer.
He asked me over and over again to promise that I would continue the case so that the American public could know what it's like for a man or a woman to die in a little room from cigarettes and to not be aware when they're young of what was going to happen to them.
They were sparked in part by the Surgeon General's report that indicated that indeed there were health ill effects from smoking, and so the link was made there. Those cases were tough.
Since many consider smoking a voluntary choice, not like faulty brakes on a car or dangerous drugs, should smokers really have the right to sue?
Most of the cases really were not very successful.
Cancer victims have sued cigarette manufacturers before and have always lost.
The state of Mississippi and 8 other states have filed suit against America's largest tobacco companies.
Yeah, the Mississippi case was one where instead of the family of somebody who died making the argument to a court that the tobacco companies ought to be held liable, the state went to the court saying, hey, the state has suffered some damages.
The states are demanding reimbursement by the companies for the billions of dollars the states say they have spent treating Medicaid patients who got sick smoking cigarettes.
They say, look, we're bearing the ultimate cost of the tobacco illnesses. It should be the companies, so please shift the cost to the companies and make them pay us back.
Once the Mississippi case had been resolved, attorneys general from around the country realized that their state, too, had an opportunity to get compensated by the tobacco companies. The judge in the Wisconsin case made it clear, you've got to show me that the tobacco companies actually lobbied legislators to keep them from regulating the sale or consumption of tobacco products. At the time, I was the director of the La Follette School of Public Affairs at the university and a professor of political science. The attorneys who had been hired by the Attorney General to litigate on behalf of Wisconsin came to my office at the university. They indicated that they really liked me to help them out, to help document the lobbying, that there were all sorts of documents that I could look at, obviously, but there was also a real potential gold mine, and that was some documents that had been taken by a whistleblower who was working in the Chicago office of the American Tobacco Institute. Really started feeling terrible that he was promoting a health risk for people and damaging lives. And so he took documents, put them in his car, drove to Wisconsin, deposited them with the State Historical Society, who then got connected with this law firm. And they suggested that I take a look at these documents and help them by really examining the kind of lobbying that the tobacco companies did in Wisconsin. This would be a great opportunity. It would be very interesting. And so I said, sure, I'd be happy to help out. Well, I was going through this one file, and it started out with some memos about having a campaign to keep young people from smoking. And he said, we'll have to figure out something to go with it, because obviously we don't want that to happen. So that statement in itself was pretty incriminating. Then I read through a little bit further, and there was a memo that said there was going to be this campaign to keep young people from smoking, which would be used to argue to the legislature that the companies didn't need any regulation, they were being responsible. But at the same time, this guy bragged about passing out in school zones free cigarettes that had been spiked so that they would be addicted much more quickly than normal cigarettes. Well, I immediately made a copy of it and called the lawyers and said, hey, guess what I found? And I think they broke out champagne at the other end of the phone. I didn't hear a lot about it actually until there was an announcement that there was a settlement. Well, I got the clear impression from talking with the lawyers that finding that incriminating memo was key to precipitating the master settlement and having the whole issue kind of wrapped up from the standpoint of the tobacco companies.
To settle state lawsuits, America's major tobacco companies signed a tobacco settlement agreement that provides the states over $200 billion. And restricts the marketing of tobacco products. Bans all tobacco billboards and more tobacco logos on clothing, no paid tobacco products, and no more cartoon characters. Strictly prohibits the marketing of tobacco to kids. It restricts tobacco brand sponsorship. And it provides $1.5 billion to fund youth anti-smoking ads in education. Because things are changing. And at Philip Morris, we wanted you to know.
Well, my initial thoughts were positive. I was hopeful. It seemed to me that this was a loss for the tobacco companies. That's how I saw it. And that the states would benefit from getting some of their health care costs taken care of. So I was optimistic. The implementation of the master settlement was very disappointing. The amount of money spent on efforts to keep people from smoking was really pretty minimal.
According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, only 5% of the settlement funds are being spent on tobacco prevention.
An effect of the settlement, which was not anticipated, probably should have been, was that tobacco prices went up. And they didn't go up in a way that benefited the tobacco farmers, but rather the tobacco companies. And in retrospect, it seems pretty clear it was a way of having smokers pay for what the tobacco companies were supposed to pay.